Whether as an NBA fan you agree with labeling players as a bust or not, it's something that has become a massive part of the NBA culture. We all know the biggest bust in NBA history, whether it's Anthony Bennett, Darko Millic, or Kwame Brown. But what if a whole draft class is a bust? We have all heard of the great draft classes. 03 and 84 stand out as some of the greatest in history, with players like Lebron, Wade, Melo and Bosh in 03, and Jordan, Hakeem and Barkley in 84. All of them either current or future Hall of Fame talents. But let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum and try and answer what's the worst draft class in NBA history. So firstly, for this video, I won't be covering any draft class later than 2014. This is because the perception of a draft class can change drastically with time. For an example, the 2013 NBA draft class was considered extremely weak after many of the lottery picks underperformed. When the lottery included players like Cody Zeller going number 4 or Nerlens Noel at 6, and of course Anthony Bennett, the first overall pick, who is widely regarded as the biggest bust in NBA history. But now the draft class is viewed very solid. As a future 2-time MVP and DPOY, Giannis Antetokounmpo was drafted. And multiple-time DPOY winner Rudy Gobert, and the always underrated scorer CJ McCollum. And it also had a litany of solid role players like Steven Adams, Dennis Schroeder, Tim Hardaway Jr. and Otto Porter Jr. The 2013 draft class may have had a weak lottery, but it had some great players in it. So that is why I won't cover any recent draft classes, but let's get into the bad. So what makes a bad draft class? Well, it takes a few factors. For this video, I will be looking at the overall quality of the draft. Even if the draft class doesn't produce 4 future All-NBA level talents, it can still be a solid draft class if it produces a lot of good NBA contributors. I will also be looking at the best players in the draft. One superstar player in a draft can drastically change a draft from being average to being amazing. With these 2 criteria points, let's look at the worst draft class in NBA history. Firstly, honorable mentions to 2001 and 1986 NBA draft classes. The 2001 draft class is the infamous Kwame Brown draft class. One of the biggest busts in NBA history, definitely doesn't help this draft class. Pau Gasol was a part of this draft class and did become a premier center in the NBA, winning 2 NBA titles alongside Kobe Bryant in LA. Tony Parker was a premier point guard and a multi-time champion with the San Antonio Spurs. Tyson Chandler became one of the premier defensive bigs of his generation. And Gilbert Arenas, whose star burned briefly, but was an amazing scorer on his day. The rest of the draft class was extremely weak in terms of producing NBA level talents, especially in the lottery. Eddie Griffin and Desenga Diop, picks 6 and 7 respectively, never amounted to anything in the NBA. And that just kind of goes for the rest of this draft class. 1986 is a pretty harsh mention, as the true star in this draft, Len Bias, sadly passed away shortly after being drafted due to a cocaine overdose. Brad Daugherty was a future All-NBA talent taken with the first pick. And Dennis Rodman became an integral part of the Bulls dynasty. Outside of that, though, the draft was poor. The next best player in the draft was Ron Harper, which isn't saying much. Sorry to all you Ron Harper stands out there. I know there's at least one of you. But the worst class in NBA history is the 2000 draft class. The 2000 draft class, which is widely considered by not just me, but a large consensus of the NBA community as the worst draft class of all time. When Kenyon Martin is by far the best player of your draft class, you know it's a stinker. The draft class combined for only 3 All-Star selections. Yep, And the most All-Star selections by a player in that draft class was 1. Yep, it's bad. 18 out of the 29 first-round selections were out of the NBA in just 9 years, which is well below even the bad draft classes mentioned before, and 7 of them only lasted 5 years in the league. Kenyon Martin, Michael Redd, and Jamal McClure were the best players in the draft class who, whilst having decent careers, they were only really above average supporting players in the NBA. The draft did produce some solid players outside of them, including Jamal Crawford, who was a 3-time Sixth Man of the Year, who averaged 14.6 points per game over his career, but compared to the other drafts, this lacked in any sort of star players. Jamal Crawford is the perfect player to symbolize this entire draft. The top selections of this draft were pretty much just good six men. Stormiles Swift, Darius Miles, and Marcus Fizer were all selected with the top 5 picks. And I wouldn't be surprised if you never heard of them, because they were all major busts. So that was a brief history of the worst draft classes in NBA history. But what do you think the worst draft class in NBA history is? Comment down below and have a great day. Laters.